On the day I celebrated my 20th anniversary with their corporation, I received a cupcake and a termination letter, signed by the CEO's wife. What she didn't know was that I held the keys to the $400 million budget her family's empire depended on each year. 20 years of loyalty, dismissed in 20 seconds. But numbers never lie. And neither do I. Today, she made the most expensive mistake of her life. My name is Claire Donovan, and for 2 decades, I've been the invisible architect of RedBridge Group's financial empire. At 45, I've outlasted 3 CEOs, 7 CFOs, and countless executives who came and went like seasonal decorations. While they played golf and posed for Forbes, I sat in my corner office on the 32nd floor, orchestrating the movement of hundreds of millions through our labyrinth of subsidiaries, shell companies, and investment vehicles. The Denver skyline spread before my window like a chessboard, each building representing another piece in the real estate game we'd mastered. I'd joined RedBridge as a junior analyst when the company managed 3 strip malls and a parking garage. Now we controlled 42 subsidiaries across 17 states, with assets approaching $2 billion. Not that anyone outside our C-suite knew the real numbers. That was my job, making the complex appear simple. The questionable seem legitimate. The impossible become profitable. Gregory Langston, our current CEO, inherited his position like a birthright 5 years ago. Competent enough to not destroy what others built. Charismatic enough to charm investors. But ultimately a figurehead who relied on people like me to keep the machine running. I'd trained myself to be indispensable, but invisible. The kind of person whose absence would only be noticed when systems began to fail. Then came Celeste. 6 months ago, Gregory's wife materialized in our corporate ecosystem like an invasive species, blonde, Botoxed, and armed with an MBA from an online university. She'd convinced her husband that RedBridge needed fresh perspective in its leadership. The board, populated by Gregory's golf buddies and yacht club companions, rubber-stamped her appointment to a newly created position, Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives. Translation: a 6-figure salary for meddling in departments she didn't understand. I should have seen the signs. The way she'd pause outside my office, studying the certificates on my wall. How she'd accidentally schedule meetings during my standing appointments with key investors. The pointed questions about redundancies in the finance department always delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. The truth was simple. Celeste couldn't stand that investors asked for me by name. That board members called my extension directly when they needed real answers. That her husband, in rare moments of honesty, admitted the company would collapse without me. In her world of charity galas and society pages, I was an anomaly. A woman who'd earned respect through competence rather than connections. So on a humid Thursday morning in July, as I arranged 20 years of service awards on my desk and prepared for the small ceremony the company traditionally held for such milestones, I wasn't entirely surprised when Celeste appeared in my doorway. Her timing, as always, was impeccable. Gregory was in Tokyo. The senior staff were at an off-site, and the office was nearly empty. She carried a pink bakery box in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. Even then, I knew which one contained the real message. "Claire, darling." Celeste purred, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she entered my office uninvited. 20 years! What an achievement! Gregory wanted to be here, but you know how these Asia trips are. I knew exactly how these trips were. I'd authorized the budget for them. After all, Gregory was probably nursing a hangover in the peninsula Tokyo, having closed another deal that I'd have to somehow make profitable on paper. She placed the pink box on my desk with theatrical precision. Through the clear window, I could see a single cupcake with 20 written in gold frosting. The manila envelope remained in her manicured grip. "The board asked me to handle a delicate matter," she continued, settling into the chair across from my desk like a queen granting an audience. "As you know, RedBridge is evolving. We're bringing in fresh talent, modernizing our approach, young minds with new ideas about financial management." Young minds. I'd interviewed the team she'd hired last month, Kids fresh from business school who couldn't differentiate between EBITDA and their own student loan payments. One of them had asked me what a depreciation schedule was. The thing is, Celeste leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. We've identified some redundancies in senior management, positions that, while historically important, no longer align with our forward-thinking vision. I watched her performance with the same detachment I used when reviewing quarterly reports. Every gesture calculated, every pause rehearsed. She'd probably practiced this speech in her mirror this morning, right after her third mimosa. Effective immediately, we're restructuring the finance department. She slid the envelope across my desk. Your position has been eliminated. Security will escort you out within the hour. We'll mail your personal items. The words hung between us like numbers that didn't balance. 20 years reduced to a 60-minute eviction notice. I opened the envelope, scanning the termination letter. Strategic restructuring. Position redundancy. Thank you for your service. Her signature at the bottom, bold and self-important. I'll need your company devices, access cards, and passwords, she added, producing a checklist from her designer bag. Our new CFO starts Monday. Someone with a more contemporary approach to financial management. New CFO, I almost laughed. The woman who once asked me to explain why we couldn't just print more money when cash flow was tight had hired my replacement. Of course, I said, maintaining the same neutral tone I used when explaining to auditors why certain expenses appeared in certain columns. I'll prepare transition documents for your new CFO. They'll need to understand the cross-collateralization structure, the subsidiary payment schedules, the automated transfer protocols. That won't be necessary. Celeste interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. We've hired a consulting firm to handle the transition. Best practices, you understand, clean slate. A consulting firm? For the first time in 20 years, I felt a genuine smile tugging at my lips. They were bringing in outsiders to decode a system I'd built from scratch. A financial labyrinth where every path led back to my desk. Good luck with that. I pulled out my phone, laptop, and access cards, placing them in a neat row on the desk. Then I reached for the USB drive on my keychain, a tiny device that contained backup protocols, system passwords, and most importantly, the manual overrides for our automated payment systems. I hesitated for just a moment before adding it to the pile. The system passwords, Celeste prompted, sliding a form across the desk. I filled it out methodically. Every password, every access code, every authentication key. All of them correct as of this morning. What I didn't mention was the fail-safe I'd built into the system 3 years ago. A simple protocol that required my biometric confirmation every 30 days to maintain the automated transfers between our subsidiaries. Without it, the money would simply sit, frozen in digital limbo while interest accumulated and loan payments waited. Is that everything? Celeste asked, her triumph barely concealed. Everything you asked for, I confirmed, standing and smoothing my skirt. May I ask who the new CFO is? Bradley Ashford, she preened. He restructured the Henley Group's finances last year, increased their stock price by 12%. I knew Bradley. I also knew the Henley Group had filed for bankruptcy 6 months after he left. Another detail Celeste had apparently missed during her due diligence. Excellent choice, I said, gathering my purse and the one personal item I couldn't leave behind. A simple leather notebook containing 20 years of handwritten observations about RedBridge's true financial position. I'm sure he'll serve you well. Security appeared at my door, 2 guards I'd known for years, looking uncomfortable. I nodded at them, then turned back to Celeste. Enjoy the cupcake, I said. I'm sure the next 20 years will be interesting. As the elevator descended, I calculated the timeline in my head. 30 days until the first payment freeze, 45 until the panic set in, 60 until they realized what they'd lost. The USB drive in my pocket, the real one, not the decoy I'd left on my desk, felt warm against my palm. $400 million in automated transfers, and only one person who truly understood how to keep them flowing. They'd just fired her. The Denver Four Seasons lobby bar became my temporary office that afternoon. I nursed a martini while my phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues, their shock genuine but tinged with the relief of survivors. Better me than them. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my leather notebook and began sketching the architecture of my 20-year creation. RedBridge wasn't just a company. It was a financial Jenga tower I'd assembled piece by piece. Each subsidiary depended on loans from another, creating a circular flow of capital that appeared robust on paper but required precise timing to maintain. The Crown Street development borrowed from RedBridge Holdings, which borrowed from Mountain View Investments, which borrowed from Crown Street, a beautiful, profitable carousel that needed someone who understood its rhythm to keep it spinning. But the real artistry lay in what I called the dark flows, legitimate but obscure budget lines that funded Gregory's expensive habits and, more recently, Celeste's transformation into a society maven. The Turks and Caicos property, purchased through 3 shell companies. The art collection, classified as office improvements. The 7-figure charitable donations to her nephew's nonprofit, which somehow never seemed to do any actual charity. These weren't hidden. Every transaction was documented, filed, reported, but they were buried in footnotes of subsidiaries' quarterly statements, spread across dozens of documents that no one but me had ever bothered to read in their entirety. Completely legal, completely traceable, completely damning if assembled in the right order. My phone rang. Patricia Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates, the law firm I'd kept on personal retainer for situations I hoped would never arise. Claire, I reviewed the termination letter. They've been clever, it's technically legal, but the timing is suspicious. However, wrongful termination suits are messy, expensive, and I'm not interested in suing, I interrupted, watching the afternoon sun paint golden stripes across the mahogany bar. I need you to set up a consulting LLC. Financial advisory services, discreet, clean, ready to operate immediately. A pause? Patricia knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. Any particular type of clients in mind? Investment firms, specifically those interested in distressed asset acquisition. Another pause. Claire, I have to ask. Everything I plan to do will be perfectly legal, I assured her. I'm simply going to offer my expertise to the highest bidder. 20 years of experience must be worth something to someone. After ending the call, I ordered another martini and made a mental list. Cypress Ridge Capital topped it, RedBridge's most aggressive competitor, led by Marcus Webb, a former colleague who'd tried to poach me 3 times over the years. He'd understand the value of what I knew without needing explanations. But first, I had homework to do. That evening, in my home office overlooking Washington Park, I began my final act as RedBridge's guardian angel. Using my personal laptop and the credentials that were still active, IT wouldn't process Celeste's termination paperwork until Monday. I accessed our secure servers. I didn't steal anything, didn't delete anything, didn't sabotage anything. I simply exercised my legitimate access rights to download publicly available financial statements, audit reports, and board meeting minutes, documents any shareholder could request. The difference was, I knew which documents mattered and how they connected. By midnight, I'd assembled a master file that told RedBridge's complete financial story. Every loan, every transfer, every creative accounting decision. All perfectly legal when viewed in isolation, potentially catastrophic when viewed as a whole, especially by someone who might be interested in, say, acquiring a real estate empire at a discount. The most damning discovery came from cross-referencing expenses. Celeste had been busy. In 6 months, she'd burned through $8 million in strategic consulting fees paid to companies that existed only as post office boxes. Another $12 million in marketing initiatives that seemed to consist entirely of sponsoring her friends' charity galas. Gregory either didn't know or didn't care, probably both. But the masterstroke was finding her authentication codes in the system. In her eagerness to micromanage, She'd inserted herself into approval chains she didn't understand. Her digital signature now appeared on every major transfer, every questionable expense, every creative interpretation of accounting principles. She'd wanted control. She'd gotten it, along with the liability that came with it. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Celeste was probably celebrating her victory, planning her renovation of my office, imagining herself as the new power behind RedBridge's throne. Let her celebrate. In my experience, the most satisfying victories were the ones your opponent didn't see coming until it was too late to stop them. She thought she'd eliminated a redundancy. In reality, she'd removed the one person keeping her house of cards from collapsing. The failsafe I'd built into the payment system would activate in 29 days. Without my biometric confirmation, 42 subsidiaries would suddenly find themselves unable to access the automated transfers that kept them afloat. Loans would default. Credit lines would freeze. And someone would have to explain to very angry investors why their bulletproof real estate empire had suddenly forgotten how to move its own money. But I wouldn't be there to see it. By then, I'd be working for whoever offered the best terms for my expertise. After all, I was now a free agent with an intimate understanding of a $400 million operation. In the corporate world, that kind of knowledge was worth its weight in gold. Or in RedBridge's case, worth exactly what they'd refused to value it at: everything. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Denver sunshine that made the mountains look close enough to touch. I sat in Marcus Webb's corner office at Cypress Ridge Capital, watching him review my proposal with the intensity of a chess grandmaster studying an endgame. Independent financial consultant, he read aloud, his gray eyes never leaving the document. Specializing in real estate investment portfolio analysis and distressed asset identification. He looked up. That's certainly one way to describe what you're offering, Claire. I'd known Marcus for 15 years. We'd started as analysts at the same firm, before he'd left to build Cypress Ridge into RedBridge's fiercest competitor. He was perhaps the only person in Denver who truly understood the scale of what I'd managed. I'm offering expertise, I said simply. How you choose to apply it is your business. He leaned back, fingers steepled. And this expertise wouldn't happen to include intimate knowledge of RedBridge's financial structure? I couldn't discuss any confidential information from my previous employer, I replied, maintaining eye contact. However, I've spent 20 years analyzing public financial documents in the real estate sector. I've developed a certain intuition about market vulnerabilities. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Intuition. I like that. And this intuition tells you what, exactly? I slid a single sheet of paper across his desk. Not confidential information, just publicly available data arranged in a specific pattern. Debt ratios, payment schedules, subsidiary relationships. Nothing that couldn't be found in SEC filings, if you knew where to look. It tells me that someone should start watching the commercial paper market very carefully in about 3 weeks, I said. Particularly bonds issued by interconnected real estate holdings with automated payment systems. His eyes widened slightly as he grasped the implications. How much? Hypothetically, if someone were to position themselves correctly, they could acquire controlling interest in several major properties for perhaps 30 cents on the dollar. Maybe less, if the timing was perfect. And you'd help us identify these opportunities? For the right terms, I confirmed. 1-year consulting contract, $2 million base, plus 5% of any acquisition value realized from my strategic guidance, full indemnification. And I work exclusively from my own offices. Marcus whistled low. That's a hefty price for intuition. It's a bargain for what I'm offering, I countered. We both know Cypress Ridge has been trying to crack into RedBridge's market share for years. I'm offering you the map and the keys. What's that worth to you? He stood, walking to his window. The RedBridge building was visible in the distance, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. When can you start? I've already started, I admitted, pulling out my laptop. 3 weeks ago, RedBridge's new executive director of strategic initiatives filed several documents with the state, business registrations for consulting firms. Would you like to know what's interesting about them? For the next hour, I walked Marcus through what I'd discovered. Celeste's shadow companies, the circular billing, the fact that she'd used RedBridge's own subsidiary structure as a template, apparently not realizing she was creating a paper trail that led directly back to her. She's embezzling? Marcus asked, though it wasn't really a question. That's a legal determination I'm not qualified to make, I said carefully. I can only point out that $8 million in consulting fees seems excessive for companies that have no employees, no offices, and no actual work product. Especially when those companies happen to share registration addresses with properties owned by the CEO's wife's family. Marcus's smile grew wider. And this information is all publicly available. Every bit of it: county records, state filings, corporate registrations. Anyone could find it. I paused. Of course, they'd have to know where to look, and they'd have to understand how RedBridge's payment systems work to grasp why this matters. Which brings us back to your intuition about the commercial paper market. I nodded. In approximately 21 days, RedBridge's automated systems will attempt to execute several major transfers. If those transfers fail, due to, say, a technical glitch in their biometric security protocols, their bonds will miss payment, credit default swaps will trigger, their lenders will panic, and suddenly, $400 million in real estate assets will need new management. A technical glitch, Marcus repeated. How unfortunate for them. Indeed. Of course, Cypress Ridge could position itself as a white knight, offer to take those distressed assets off panicked investors' hands, provide stable, experienced management, save the market from chaos. How civic-minded of us. He returned to his desk, pulled out a contract. $2 million base, 5% of acquisitions. You'll have it by end of day. One question, though: why didn't you just go to the FBI with the embezzlement? I stood, smoothing my skirt. Because I spent 20 years building something remarkable, and they threw me away like yesterday's newspaper. The FBI would give Celeste a slap on the wrist and maybe some community service. I prefer a more comprehensive form of justice. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Claire. You won't, I assured him, shaking his hand. You're smart enough to know value when you see it. Walking out of Cypress Ridge, I felt the pieces clicking into place. 3 weeks until the payment system froze, 2 weeks after that until the bonds defaulted, 6 weeks until RedBridge's entire structure unraveled. And I'd be there to help Cypress Ridge pick up the pieces, earning a fortune in the process. Celeste wanted to play corporate executive. She was about to learn that in the real Game of Thrones, you didn't win by sitting in the biggest chair. You won by understanding the rules better than anyone else and knowing exactly when to break them. The unraveling began on a Tuesday, exactly as I'd calculated. My phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a text from a former colleague. Payment systems down. Bradley's losing his mind. Did you know about this? I didn't respond. Instead, I poured my coffee and opened my laptop to monitor the commercial paper market. RedBridge's bonds, rated AA just last month, were already showing stress fractures. By noon, they'd drop to BBB. By Friday, they'd be junk. From my home office, I watched the disaster unfold through financial news feeds and frantic LinkedIn updates from RedBridge employees. The new CFO, Bradley Ashford, had apparently spent the morning screaming at IT, demanding they fix what he assumed was a technical glitch. He didn't understand that the biometric failsafe wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Marcus called at 9. It's starting. Their morning transfers failed. 42 subsidiaries can't access their operating accounts. Predictable, I said, pulling up the real-time bond prices. Has Cypress Ridge begun positioning? We're buying credit default swaps as we speak. If you're right about the timeline, I'm right, I assured him. Bradley's about to discover that you can't run a $400 million operation on enthusiasm and an MBA from Wharton, not when the money stops moving. By Wednesday, the financial press had picked up the story. Technical difficulties at RedBridge Group freeze payments, read the Wall Street Journal headline. They quoted Bradley extensively, his assurances growing more desperate with each paragraph. Everything was fine. Minor hiccup? Resolved by end of week. I knew better. The subsidiary payment schedules I designed were intricate as clockwork. Miss one gear, and the whole mechanism ground to a halt. Without the automated transfers, Property A couldn't pay Property B, which couldn't service the loan from Property C, which needed that payment to cover its obligations to Property A. A perfect circle, now broken. Thursday brought the first lawsuit. A construction company, unpaid for 3 days, filed for emergency relief, then another, then 10 more. My phone rang constantly. Reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Former colleagues begging for insight. Headhunters smelling blood in the water. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the data Cypress Ridge was feeding me. Distressed bond prices, panic selling, creditors circling like wolves. Everything proceeding exactly according to plan. The press conference came Friday afternoon. I watched from my couch, a glass of wine in hand, as Celeste took the podium. She wore Chanel, of course, trying to project confidence through couture. But I could see the strain around her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she adjusted the microphone. RedBridge Group remains strong, she began, reading from obviously prepared remarks. We've experienced a temporary disruption in our payment processing systems, which our team is working around the clock to resolve. Then came the questions. Mrs. Langston, can you explain why $8 million in consulting fees were paid to companies registered to your family members? The color drained from her face. I'm not sure what you're referring to. What about the property in Turks and Caicos? County records show it was purchased through a RedBridge subsidiary but transferred to a trust in your name. That's a mischaracterization. Is it true that the FBI has opened an investigation into potential embezzlement? The camera caught it perfectly, the moment Celeste realized she wasn't playing corporate executive anymore. She was drowning, and there was no one left to throw her a line. She'd fired the only person who could have navigated this crisis. Gregory appeared then, shouldering his way to the microphone. His usual polish was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his empire crumble. We'll be conducting a full internal review, he announced. All responsible parties will be held accountable. The look Celeste gave him could have frozen hellfire. Responsible parties, they both knew who he meant. My phone buzzed. Marcus, you're watching? Every second, I confirmed. We've acquired $60 million in distressed bonds for $12 million. If they default Monday, they will, I assured him. Bradley doesn't even know where to find the manual override codes. And even if he did, the biometric scanner was keyed specifically to my retinas. They'd need a court order to compel me to cooperate. And by then we'll own half their portfolio. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Claire, I have to admit, when you first came to me, I thought you might be too emotionally invested to execute properly. I was wrong. This is surgical. I had 20 years to learn every weakness, I replied, watching Gregory escort Celeste off the stage. They thought I was just managing their money. I was managing their future. They just didn't know it. The Monday default was now inevitable. RedBridge would survive. Companies that size don't simply vanish, but it would be carved up, sold off, restructured under new management. The Langston dynasty would end not with a bang, but with a bankruptcy filing. And I'd watch it all from my new office at Cypress Ridge, earning 5% of every acquisition. Justice served at market rates. One more thing, Marcus added. When this is over, when we've acquired what we want from the wreckage, you're not planning anything similar with Cypress Ridge, are you? I laughed, genuinely amused. Marcus, you had the wisdom to hire me instead of firing me. That's the difference between you and them. You recognize value. They only recognize threats. As I ended the call, I pulled up my bank account. The $2 million wire from Cypress Ridge had cleared that morning. By my calculations, the acquisition bonuses would add another $10 million within 6 months. Not bad for a redundancy. Celeste had given me a cupcake and a pink slip. I was giving her a lesson in why you should never underestimate the person who holds your financial secrets. The payment system would officially fail in 72 hours. The bonds would default. The empire would fall. And I'd be there to profit from every piece. Monday arrived with the inevitability of gravity. From Cypress Ridge's war room, I watched the market open on 6 screens while Marcus's team executed our carefully orchestrated acquisition strategy. At 9:31 a.m., RedBridge officially defaulted on its commercial paper obligations. By 9:45, trading in their bonds was halted. By 10, the financial networks were calling it Black Monday for RedBridge. But the true poetry came at 10:15 when I received an encrypted email from Patricia, my attorney. The SEC had frozen Celeste's assets pending investigation. The FBI had raided her home that morning, seizing computers, documents, and, according to Patricia's source, a truly impressive collection of jewelry purchased with company funds. "Claire, you need to see this," Marcus called from across the room, gesturing to the main screen. An emergency shareholder meeting was being broadcast live. The boardroom I'd known for 20 years looked different now. Panic had a way of stripping away pretense. Gregory sat at the head of the table, but he looked like a man attending his own funeral. The board members flanked him, their faces grave. "Effective immediately," the lead director announced. "The board has voted to remove Celeste Langston from all positions within RedBridge Group. We've also accepted the resignation of CEO Gregory Langston." Gregory didn't even look up. Beside him, Bradley Ashford was frantically typing on his laptop, still trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't even understand. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Furthermore," the director continued, "we're announcing the sale of key assets to Cypress Ridge Capital, who has generously offered to provide immediate liquidity to protect our stakeholders' interests." Generous, I smiled at the word. We were buying their crown jewels for 30 cents on the dollar. Generous like a wolf is generous to a wounded deer. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize, but somehow knew. "Hello, Celeste," I answered, stepping into the private conference room. "You did this." Her voice was raw, stripped of its usual artificial sweetness. "You destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I corrected, settling into a leather chair. "I simply stopped maintaining the illusion. You destroyed everything the moment you decided I was expendable." "The FBI says I'm looking at 20 years. 20 years, Claire." "Coincidentally, the same amount of time I gave to RedBridge," I observed, "though I doubt you'll serve that long. First offenders usually get less, especially if they cooperate. You should probably tell them about Gregory's offshore accounts. The ones in Singapore, not the Caymans, those are already frozen." A sharp intake of breath. "How do you?" "Because I set them up," I said simply. "In 2019, when Gregory needed to move money quietly for that congressional bribery issue. You remember, the one you thought was about campaign contributions? It wasn't. But don't worry, I'm sure the FBI will explain it all to you, in detail, repeatedly." "You vindictive bitch," she hissed. "I'll tell them everything. How you built those systems, how you—" "Tell them," I interrupted. "Tell them how I built a completely legal financial structure that you corrupted. Tell them how I created transparent systems that you used for embezzlement. Tell them how every illegal transaction has your digital signature, not mine. Please, Celeste, tell them everything." Silence. Then, quieter. "What do you want?" "Want? I already have everything I want. An 8-figure bank account, a position at the firm that's about to dominate Denver's real estate market, and the satisfaction of watching you learn what happens when you mistake competence for weakness." "I could have made you CFO," she said desperately. "When Bradley fails, I could have." "You could have done many things," I agreed. "But you chose to give me a cupcake and an escort out of the building. How's that working out for you?" I ended the call and returned to the war room, where champagne was already flowing. Marcus raised a glass in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "to Claire Donovan, the woman who just handed us RedBridge's empire for less than the cost of their annual Christmas party." The team cheered, but I was already focused on the next phase. We'd acquired 12 prime properties, control of 6 development projects, and ownership stakes in 22 subsidiaries. All of it needed to be integrated, restructured, made profitable. The same work I'd done for 20 years, just with better compensation and the respect I'd earned. "Claire," Marcus said quietly, joining me at the window. "You realize what you've just done?" Gregory Langston was untouchable. His family has run this city's real estate game for 3 generations. And you just ended their dynasty with a biometric scanner and some forensic accounting. "They ended themselves," I corrected, watching the RedBridge building across the downtown skyline. "I just stopped protecting them from their own greed. Never mistake the person managing your money for a servant." "Marcus, we're the ones who know where the bodies are buried." "Noted," he said with a slight smile. "And deeply appreciated." By market close, Cypress Ridge had completed its acquisition of RedBridge's best assets. The financial press was calling it the deal of the decade. My phone had logged 300 missed calls, including one from Gregory that I'd particularly enjoyed ignoring. That night, I stood in my home office, looking at the 20-year service award I'd never received. I'd had one made myself, a crystal paperweight engraved with a simple message: "Value is determined by the market, not management." Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding what RedBridge had squandered. But tonight, I raised a glass to the sweet irony of it all. Celeste had been right about one thing. I was redundant. Redundant like a foundation is redundant to a house. Remove it, and everything collapses. She'd learned that lesson too late. $400 million too late. 6 weeks after Black Monday, I stood at the podium in the RedBridge building's former boardroom, now bearing the Cypress Ridge logo. The same room where careers had been made and destroyed. Where I'd spent countless hours explaining financial realities to people who preferred comfortable fiction. Today was different. Today, I was introducing our restructuring plan to the combined workforce. "Some of you know me," I began, scanning the familiar faces mixed with new ones. "For those who don't, I'm Claire Donovan, Chief Strategic Officer of Cypress Ridge's new real estate division. I'll be overseeing the integration of all acquired RedBridge assets." In the third row, Bradley Ashford sat with his resignation letter in hand. I'd already accepted it, along with a dozen others from Celeste's hand-picked team. They'd learned what I'd learned: competence trumps connections. Eventually, the next 90 days will determine whether these properties thrive under new management or continue their decline. I continued. "I need people who understand that finance isn't about moving numbers on spreadsheets. It's about building something sustainable. Those willing to commit to that vision will find Cypress Ridge a rewarding home. Those who can't..." I let the pause speak for itself. After the meeting, I walked through the halls I'd known for 2 decades. Same marble, same mahogany, same view of the mountains. But the energy was different now. Purposeful instead of complacent. Earned instead of inherited. My new office, larger than my old one with a better view, contained a single reminder of the past 6 weeks. A framed screenshot of RedBridge's stock price chart showing its catastrophic fall. A gift from Marcus with a note. "For the woman who proved that revenge is best served at market value," Patricia called as I was reviewing integration reports. "Thought you'd want to know. Celeste took a plea deal. 18 months minimum security, 3 years probation, full restitution. Gregory got 5 years, but he'll probably serve 2. And the assets? Frozen and liquidated. The employees' pension fund will recover most of their losses. The investors? Less so. Justice, of a sort. Though nothing could restore the 20 years I'd given them, or the dignity they'd tried to strip away with a pink bakery box." That evening, Denver's financial elite gathered for the annual Real Estate Excellence Awards. I'd attended for years, always in the background, watching Gregory accept accolades for achievements built on my invisible foundation. Tonight, Marcus had insisted I join him at the head table. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "this year's Strategic Achievement Award goes to Cypress Ridge Capital for their brilliant acquisition and restructuring of distressed assets. Accepting the award, Marcus Webb and Claire Donovan." The applause was thunderous. As I stood at the podium, I spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Former RedBridge board members who'd once walked past me in hallways, investors who now called me directly, reporters who'd finally learned my name. 6 weeks ago, I said, gripping the crystal award, someone told me I was redundant. That 20 years of building something meaningful could be erased with a signature. They were wrong. I paused, meeting the eyes of those who'd stood by while Celeste played her games. Value isn't determined by titles or connections. It's determined by what happens when you're gone. And sometimes, the most powerful position isn't the one behind the desk, it's the one holding the keys. The ballroom erupted in applause, but I was already thinking ahead. Cypress Ridge's new portfolio needed optimization. The payment systems required updating, with better safeguards this time. There were opportunities in emerging markets, strategies to develop, empires to build properly. As I returned to my seat, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, then noticed the federal facility code. Gregory. You won, Claire. I hope it was worth it, I typed back. I didn't win, Gregory. I simply stopped letting you lose with my help. Later that night, standing on my apartment balcony with Denver glittering below, I reflected on the journey. 20 years building someone else's dream. 6 weeks tearing it down. A lifetime ahead to build something better. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They're wrong. Revenge is best served exactly at market temperature, calculated, precise, and timed for maximum profit. Celeste had given me a cupcake and a termination letter, thinking she was ending my story. Instead, she'd handed me the pen to write a better ending, one where competence triumphs over connections, where value is recognized, and where the person managing the money finally gets to count her own worth. $400 million. That's what they'd thought they controlled. But I'd known the truth all along. They'd never controlled anything. I had. The city lights sparkled like the numbers on a balance sheet, each one representing possibility, potential, profit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build and grow. Tonight, though, I raised my glass one last time to the woman who'd made it all possible. Thank you, Celeste. Your ignorance was the most valuable gift anyone ever gave me. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and vindication. I'm curious, where are you listening to this tale of power and payback? Drop a comment below and let's connect. If Claire's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in her position? Sometimes the best revenge truly is massive success.